Let's talk about how to create a solid strategy for your content team so that they're not just taking content off your plate, but that content has a purpose and is helping serve your business. This is going to be a quick and dirty overview of what you need to have in place so that your content team is empowered to create this content for you and isn't coming back to you with a million and one questions all the time. All right, number one, first, if you have a strategist, lean on them. As the CEO, you don't need to be writing the content, and there's a point where you don't necessarily need to be the person strategizing around the content. This may not be your zone of genius, or even if it is, if that's not the focus of your business, your time and energy may be better served elsewhere. So if you have access to someone who can strategize around your messaging and around your content, lean on them, look to them for support, have your goals in mind when you go to them, but really listen to what they have to say and what they suggest based on your specific situation. If you don't have a strategist and you don't have access to one, that's all right. You can still do this on your own. Here are a few tips to get you started. Begin with the end in mind. This is something that I learned from my days as a high school teacher when we would have to prepare students for certain examinations or certain projects, things that we needed to have them do or understand by the end of a semester. We always begin with those end goals in mind and work backwards from there. So if you have a launch coming up, if you have a new program that you want to put out to the world and you know that that's going to happen 6 months from now, if you have a book that's getting published, a new YouTube series that's launching, whatever your end goal is, keep that in mind and work backwards from that. It's okay if the end goal is out farther than the period of content that you're strategizing for. Let's say your end goal is to get 100 new participants in a course. And that goal really isn't going to be accomplished for another 6 to 9 months. And you're just working on content for the next 3 months. That's okay. Let your content team know what that end goal is. And then you're going to get really specific about how the next 3 months are going to support that goal in 9 months. And that lets everyone know not just where the content is going in the short term, but what the long-term trajectory is. If you don't have a goal that goes out that far in advance, that's okay. Try to get just a couple of months ahead, usually at least a quarter ahead as far as goals are concerned, because then you can set benchmarks working backwards. So end goal, and then benchmarks along the way. Those benchmarks may differ depending on your team, depending on how quickly they produce content, what kind of deadlines are coming up, things like that. But usually what I like to do personally is plan out at least a quarter in advance and have a benchmark at the end of each month within that quarter. So there's essentially a benchmark at the end of month 1, at the end of month 2, and then the end of the quarter at the end of month 3, and then it starts over again. You can use a similar format for a longer trajectory. So start with the end in mind, create benchmarks throughout. Make sure those benchmarks are used for communicating how things are going, if our goals are on target, if the numbers are reflecting what they need to be reflecting. So if you're building your audience to get these 100 people in the course, is there growth? Is the content that is being created showing growth? That's what those benchmarks are for, to check in and see if we're on the right path. The next thing to think about once you have those end goals in mind is the content itself. So we like to think of it in terms of core content and supporting content. Just like in a movie, you have your lead actor and actress, and then you have your supporting roles. In this case, a core piece of content is your lead. Usually, this is a bigger piece of content or at least a more in-depth piece of content. It might be a pillar blog post. It might be a webinar or a masterclass training. It could be something that you're putting out on video, a challenge that you're running. It's a core piece of content that all of the other content will work to support. Generally, we suggest doing one piece of core content a quarter. Anything more than that can become overwhelming, but that depends on the size of your business and the amount of initiatives that you're doing at once. So that depends on how it fits you and your business. For our business, we tend to do one piece of core content a quarter. And that core content helps get us closer to our end goal. And from that core content, we create supporting content. The supporting content is repurposed from the core content. What this means is our content team is not creating a ton of new content constantly. It's taking the core content and using it as the inspiration for additional pieces of content. Everything ties back to that central hub, and it keeps the content team focused on the goal. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are only creating one blog post and then just a bunch of social media posts off of that. What it could look like is one pillar blog post that's a long, in-depth blog post that does have some social media posts and pieces of content off of it, and then maybe additional blog posts that go out that quarter that dive into additional related topics that can link back to that initial pillar post. So the core content is where everything starts, and around it orbit all of these other little pieces of content, and everything is aiming to support your end goal. Last bit is to give your team investment and freedom. So you have the end in mind, you have benchmarks set up, you have an idea for a core piece of content. Supporting content, you don't necessarily need to have the idea for exactly what all of that supporting content is going to be. This is where you can give your team some investment and ownership over your content and allow them to take the reins. They may know better than you which avenues make the most sense for your business. If they don't, that's an opportunity to pull the strategist in again and see where does it make the most sense to set this content free. Is it in a blog? Is it in a video? Is it through a podcast? Where can this content be leveraged most effectively? So giving your team the investment and freedom, especially around supporting content, is a really powerful way to make sure that they feel ownership over those end goals. If they know that the end goal is to get 100 people into this course, and they know that the content they create is supporting that goal and there are benchmarks along the way, then they're going to feel that sense of ownership and investment over helping you achieve that goal. It no longer is just your goal, it's the team's goal. So if you are in the position where you want your content strategy to really work for your team without overwhelming them, without giving you or them so much content to create that it's actually diluting your message instead of supporting your message, here's a quick recap. First, trust a strategist if you have one, and if you don't, go ahead and follow these steps for yourself. Begin with the end in mind and work backwards. Think in terms of core content and supporting content, just like in a movie, and give your team investment and freedom to experiment and play and find the avenues that work best for your business. Remember, they're in your content every day. As you move away from being the sole content creator of your business, you're in it less and less, which means that you are not necessarily the right person to make those decisions. Your content team may be. So this is also an exercise in trust. Trust them and then use the benchmarks as a way to course correct. Hopefully this was helpful in creating a content strategy for your team and for your business that leverages content in a really effective way.